When the educated black woman was sent to the kitchen for her skin color, the wealthy rancher stepped forward and declared with steel in his voice, "She is my wife." The Grand Manor's guests recoil in horror at the articulate woman they assumed belonged scrubbing floors forever. Town matriarchs whisper she'll be cast out by morning, her dreams of respect crushed like so many before her. But the mysterious rancher holds secrets that could shatter their world. Or his own. Their hidden marriage threatens the railroad deal that will make or break the entire territory's future. His business partners circle like vultures, demanding he choose between his fortune and his heart. Will their love survive the forces trying to destroy them both, or will revealing the truth cost them everything they've built? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt outside Silver Creek Territory's Grand Hotel. Dust swirled around polished boots as Etta Mae Carter stepped down, her traveling dress immaculate despite the long journey from Chicago. She clutched her leather satchel containing teaching credentials and correspondence about the governess position at Hawthorne Manor. Curious eyes followed her every step. Whispers rippled through the small crowd gathered near the hotel entrance. The well-dressed woman with dark skin moved with confidence that seemed to unsettle the onlookers. She carried herself like someone accustomed to respect, not servitude. Etta Mae approached the hotel clerk. She presented her letter of introduction with a steady hand. The young man's eyes widened as he read the elegant script. His gaze darted between the document and her face, confusion creasing his brow. The morning sun climbed higher as Etta Mae made her way toward the impressive Hawthorne Manor on the hill. The sprawling estate commanded attention with its white columns and manicured gardens. Everything spoke of wealth and influence. This was exactly the kind of household that valued education and refinement. Mrs. Campbell emerged from the servants' entrance before Etta Mae could reach the front door. The head housekeeper's sharp eyes assessed the approaching visitor with immediate disapproval. Her thin lips pressed into a tight line. "You lost, girl?" Etta Mae straightened her shoulders. "I'm here about the governess position. I have an appointment with Mr. Hawthorne." Mrs. Campbell snatched the letter from Etta Mae's hands. She scanned it quickly, then looked up with obvious irritation. "There's been some mistake. The governess position ain't for your kind. My qualifications speak for themselves. I've taught mathematics, literature, and Latin to the children of prominent Chicago families. Don't matter what you taught up north. This is Silver Creek territory." Mrs. Campbell's voice cut through the morning air. "Kitchen help is what we need. Take it or leave it." Etta Mae felt the familiar sting of dismissal. She'd faced this before, but something about this particular rejection felt different. There had been something in Mr. Hawthorne's letters that suggested he understood her worth. Perhaps she'd misread his intentions. The housekeeper thrust a bundle of servant's clothing into Etta Mae's arms. "Change into these. Tonight's dinner party needs extra hands. Important folks coming to discuss railroad business." Inside the servants' quarters, Etta Mae changed into the plain uniform. The fabric felt rough against her skin, a stark contrast to her carefully chosen traveling dress. She folded her good clothes with deliberate care, treating them like armor she'd wear again soon. The kitchen buzzed with activity. Cook barked orders at scurrying servants. Steam rose from enormous pots, while the smell of roasting meat filled the air. Etta Mae took her assigned position at the washing station, her hands working automatically while her mind processed everything she observed. "Mr. Hawthorne been acting strange since he got back from Chicago," one servant whispered to another. "Had the whole master bedroom wing redone. Fancy furniture arriving every week." "Heard he's been asking about preparations for someone special," another voice added. "Cook's been told to prepare meals for two in the private dining room." Etta Mae's ears perked up at the mention of Chicago. Coincidence seemed unlikely. She continued scrubbing dishes while gathering information from the flowing conversations around her. An elderly ranch hand entered the kitchen through the back door. His weathered face bore the marks of decades under the sun, but his eyes held sharp intelligence. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned respect through experience rather than position. "Evening, Lem," Cook called out. "Dinner party got you working late?" Lem Tiny nodded, his gaze settling on Etta Mae with curious recognition. He studied her face as if trying to place a memory. "Things ain't always what they seem around here," he said quietly, though his words seemed directed at her specifically. The preparation intensified as evening approached. Silver platters gleamed under lamplight. Crystal glasses caught and reflected the flickering flames. Everything had to be perfect for the territory's most influential families. Etta May learned the guest list through kitchen chatter. Railroad executives from back east, the mayor and his wife, Dottie Campbell, the town's self-appointed social authority, and Mrs. Campbell's sister, local ranchers whose support could make or break business deals. "Where's Mr. Hawthorne?" Mrs. Campbell asked, checking her pocket watch with growing irritation. "Guests arriving soon and he ain't even dressed." "Still in his study," Lem replied. "Been locked in there since this afternoon. Seemed nervous about something." Etta May carried serving platters into the grand dining room. The space took her breath away despite her circumstances. Elaborate chandelier cast dancing shadows on rich wallpaper. The long mahogany table could seat 20 comfortably. Guests began arriving in elegant carriages. Their voices filled the air with discussions of progress, prosperity, and the railroad deal that would transform Silver Creek territory forever. Etta May moved invisibly among them, refilling glasses and clearing plates while absorbing every word. The future of the entire territory hung in the balance. The railroad contract meant jobs, growth, and connection to the wider world. Without it, Silver Creek would remain isolated and struggling. Everyone understood the stakes. One chair at the head of the table remained conspicuously empty. The mysterious Mr. Hawthorne had yet to make his appearance at his own dinner party. The grand dining room hummed with conversation as Silver Creek Territory's elite gathered around the mahogany table. Railroad executives discussed profit margins while local ranchers debated land values. The empty chair at the head of the table drew increasingly worried glances from Mrs. Campbell. Etta May moved silently between the guests, refilling wine glasses and removing finished courses. Her presence barely registered with the diners, who spoke freely about business matters that would shape the territory's future. The railroad deal dominated every conversation. "Hawthorne better not be having second thoughts," muttered one executive to his companion. "This contract depends on his cooperation." Dottie Campbell held court at the opposite end of the table, her sharp voice cutting through the general chatter. She commanded attention with stories of social propriety and territorial traditions. Her eyes frequently swept the room, cataloging every detail for future gossip. "Standards must be maintained," Dottie declared, adjusting her elaborate necklace, "especially during these changing times. Some people forget their proper place in society." Her gaze landed on Etta May with obvious disdain. The other guests followed her stare, suddenly aware of the servant moving among them. Whispers began spreading around the table like wildfire. Etta May felt the weight of their scrutiny, but continued her duties with quiet dignity. She'd endured worse than disapproving stares from wealthy dinner guests. Her hands remained steady as she served the next course. "You there!" Dottie's voice rang out sharply. "Move faster! Our glasses shouldn't be empty!" The room fell silent, all eyes focused on the confrontation developing between the town's social leader and the kitchen servant. Etta May approached Dottie's chair with measured steps, wine bottle in hand. "Perhaps you didn't hear me properly," Dottie continued, her voice growing louder. "When I speak, you respond immediately." Etta May filled the glass without comment. Her silence seemed to infuriate Dottie further. The woman's face flushed red as she leaned forward in her chair. "Look at me when I'm speaking." "To you. Don't you know basic manners?" The other guests watched with uncomfortable fascination. Some shifted in their seats while others leaned forward eagerly. The confrontation provided entertainment more engaging than business discussions. Etta May met Dottie's glare with calm composure. Her education and dignity shone through despite the servant's uniform. This only seemed to anger Dottie more. "I don't like your attitude," Dottie announced to the entire table. "Kitchen help should know their place. This one thinks she's better than her station." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the room. The railroad executives nodded approvingly. Social order needed maintaining, especially in frontier territories where civilization hung by delicate threads. "Send her back to the kitchen where she belongs," Dottie commanded Mrs. Campbell. "We don't need uppity servants disrupting our dinner." Mrs. Campbell moved toward Etta May with obvious satisfaction. The head housekeeper had been waiting for this moment since the morning's encounter. Her authority would be publicly validated before the territory's most important families. The dining room door opened with quiet authority. Judson Hawthorne stepped into the lamplight, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore his expensive suit with natural grace. His dark hair showed traces of silver at the temples. Intelligence burned in his steady brown eyes. The assembled guests straightened in their chairs. Conversations ceased as all focus shifted to their host. He surveyed the scene with careful observation, taking in Dottie's flushed face and Etta May's dignified posture. "Judson," called out one of the railroad executives, "we were beginning to worry you'd forgotten about your own dinner party." Hawthorne's gaze lingered on his wife's face. 3 months of marriage hadn't diminished his admiration for her strength and grace. Even dressed as a servant, she carried herself with the poise that had first captured his attention in Chicago. "My apologies for the delay," he said, his voice carrying easily through the large room. "Business matters required attention." Dottie seized the opportunity to demonstrate her social authority. "Judson, dear, we were just dealing with an impudent servant. I've instructed Mrs. Campbell to remove her from our presence." The room waited for Hawthorne's response. His reputation for decisive leadership preceded him in all business dealings. Everyone expected swift action to restore proper order. Hawthorne walked slowly around the table, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. He passed each guest deliberately, building tension with his measured approach. His destination became clear as he moved toward Etta May. "This woman," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like steel. Dottie smiled triumphantly. The other guests leaned forward expectantly. Mrs. Campbell stepped closer, ready to escort the troublesome servant away from decent society. Hawthorne reached Etta May's side and turned to face the assembled company. His hand moved to rest gently on her shoulder. The gesture sent shockwaves through the watching crowd. "She is my wife." The words landed like thunder in the crystal-laden room. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. Forks clattered against china plates. The grandfather clock in the corner seemed to tick louder in the stunned silence. Dottie's mouth opened and closed without sound. Her face drained of color before flushing deep crimson. The elaborate necklace rose and fell with her rapid breathing. Railroad executives exchanged sharp glances across the table. Their carefully negotiated contracts suddenly hung in jeopardy. Social scandal could destroy business partnerships overnight. Mrs. Campbell gripped the back of a chair for support. Her authority crumbled as she realized her afternoon's humiliation of the governess applicant had been directed at her employer's wife. Etta May felt Judson's supportive presence beside her. The moment they'd both dreaded and anticipated had finally arrived. Their secret was revealed to the world that would judge them harshest. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. The silence shattered like breaking glass. Dottie Campbell's chair scraped against the floor as she swayed backward, her hand pressed against her chest. The elaborate necklace caught the lamplight as she gasped for breath. Her eyes rolled upward before she collapsed in a dramatic faint. Railroad executives shot to their feet, their faces thunderous. The lead negotiator pointed an accusatory finger at Hawthorne. "This changes everything. Our partnership is finished." Chairs crashed as guests abandoned the table in outrage. Women clutched their skirts and hurried toward the exit, whispering frantically to their husbands. Men shook their heads in disgust, muttering about social boundaries and proper behavior. "You've lost your mind, Hawthorne," shouted the mayor, his face purple with indignation. "This territory won't stand for such nonsense." Mrs. Campbell fanned her unconscious sister while shooting venomous glares at Etta May. The head housekeeper's authority lay in ruins, her judgment publicly humiliated before the community's most important families. Within minutes, the grand dining room stood empty, except for abandoned plates and overturned wine glasses. The carefully prepared feast grew cold, while crystal stemware caught the flickering lamplight like scattered tears. Judson placed his hand on Etta May's arm, guiding her away from the wreckage of their social standing. They walked through the mansion's corridors in heavy silence. each step echoing their isolation from the world outside. The master bedroom welcomed them with warm lamplight and familiar comfort. Rich burgundy curtains blocked the view of departing carriages. Expensive furniture from Chicago surrounded them like protective barriers against the hostility beyond these walls. Etta May sank into the velvet armchair beside the fireplace. The servant's uniform felt foreign against her skin now that the charade had ended. She'd worn many disguises over the years, but none had prepared her for this evening's revelation. "They'll never accept us," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Judson knelt beside her chair, his strong hands covering hers. "We knew this moment would come. The question was never whether they'd accept us, but whether we'd stand together when they didn't." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, carriage wheels rolled away into the night, carrying news that would spread through Silver Creek territory like wildfire. 3 months ago, Etta May had been teaching the Worthington children in their Chicago mansion. Mathematics came easily to young Timothy, but literature challenged him. She'd spent patient hours helping him understand poetry's deeper meanings. Judson had arrived for a business meeting with Timothy's father. Railroad expansion required careful negotiations with Eastern investors. The Worthington family's support could make or break territorial development plans. She'd been leaving the library when they first encountered each other in the hallway. Her arms had been full of books while his held architectural plans for train stations. Their collision had scattered papers across the marble floor. "Forgive me," he'd said, immediately dropping to gather her fallen volumes. His hands had paused when he noticed the advanced mathematics textbook among the children's readers. "You teach calculus to the Worthington children?" Timothy shows exceptional aptitude for numbers. His parents believe in challenging their children's minds. Their conversation had continued in the library. She'd explained her teaching philosophy while he'd shared his vision for connecting isolated territories with modern transportation. Intelligence had sparked between them like electricity. The second meeting had been arranged deliberately. Judson had requested her assistance with educational planning for Silver Creek Territory's future schools. They'd spent hours discussing curriculum development and teacher training programs. By the third meeting, professional respect had deepened into genuine admiration. Etta May's insights into community development impressed him. Her understanding of social dynamics surpassed many political advisors he'd consulted. "You see possibilities where others see only problems," he'd told her during one of their evening discussions. "Problems are just puzzles waiting for the right solution," she'd replied. The proposal had come after 6 weeks of careful courtship. Judson had recognized the challenges their union would face, but his certainty about their partnership had overridden social concerns. Etta May's background had prepared her for complex situations. Her parents had been among the first freed slaves to establish a school in their community. They'd taught her that education was the key to dignity and respect. She'd learned mathematics by solving real problems for her neighbors. Mrs. Johnson needed help calculating fair crop shares. Mr. Williams required assistance understanding bank loan terms. Each challenge had strengthened her analytical abilities. Her reading skills had developed through borrowed books from wealthy families who discarded volumes after brief use. She'd consumed philosophy, literature, and science texts with hungry determination. Knowledge had become her weapon against a world that underestimated her worth. Teaching positions had come through careful networking and proven results. Chicago families valued education enough to overlook social prejudices when their children's success was at stake. Her reputation had grown through student achievements rather than social connections. Now those same skills would be tested in Silver Creek Territory's hostile environment. The dinner party's explosion had destroyed their hopes for gradual acceptance. Tomorrow would bring consequences that could devastate everything they'd worked to build. The railroad contract hung in jeopardy. Territorial development plans faced collapse. Judson's business partnerships lay shattered like the crystal glasses abandoned in the dining room below. "The bank will call in our loans," Judson said, staring into the fire. "Without the railroad deal, we can't meet the payments." Etta May's mind was already working through possibilities. Her analytical training refused to accept defeat without exploring every option. Problems existed to be solved, not endured. "Tell me about the opposition," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Who benefits if we fail?" Dawn brought harsh reality to Hawthorne Manor. Etta May dressed in her own clothes for the first time since arriving, the fine fabric a declaration of her true status. The servant's uniform lay discarded like yesterday's deceptions. She found Judson in his study, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence. Dark circles under his eyes revealed a sleepless night spent calculating their financial position. The numbers painted a grim picture of their future prospects. 3 business partners withdrew their investments this morning, he reported without looking up from the papers. The bank president sent a formal notice of concern about our loan obligations. Etta May studied the documents over his shoulder. Her mathematical training allowed her to quickly assess their situation. They had perhaps 2 months before complete financial collapse, assuming no additional income sources emerged. A sharp knock interrupted their analysis. Lem Tiny entered with his usual quiet confidence, his weathered hands holding a folded newspaper. His expression carried both sympathy and determination. "Town's talking," he said simply, placing the paper on Judson's desk. "Dottie Campbell's been busy, spreading her version of last night's events." The headlines screamed across the front page in bold letters. Social scandal dominated the territorial news, pushing railroad negotiations and economic development to secondary importance. Dottie's dramatic account painted Etta May as a deceptive schemer who had somehow entrapped the territory's most eligible bachelor. "She's calling for a complete boycott of the ranch," Lem continued. "No supplies, no services, no business dealings. Wants to force you into dissolving the marriage." Etta May felt familiar anger building in her chest. She'd faced similar campaigns before, but never with stakes this high. Her personal struggles had never threatened an entire community's economic future. "What about support?" Judson asked. "Anyone standing with us?" "Some of the ranch hands are loyal. They've seen your character firsthand. A few merchants in town seem uncomfortable with Dottie's methods, but they're afraid to speak publicly." Etta May moved to the window overlooking the ranch grounds. Workers went about their morning tasks with visible tension. Some avoided looking toward the main house, while others cast sympathetic glances in her direction. "I need to meet with them," she said firmly. "The workers deserve to hear our side directly." Judson started to object, but Etta May's determined expression stopped him. She'd spent her life hiding behind other people's protection. The time for concealment had passed. The ranch hands gathered in the main barn, their faces showing mixtures of curiosity, concern, and barely concealed hostility. Some had worked for the Hawthorne family for years. Others were recent hires who barely knew their employers personally. Etta May stood before them without notes or prepared speeches. Her Chicago teaching experience had taught her the value of direct communication. These men respected honesty above eloquence. "I know yesterday's revelation shocked everyone," she began. "You have every right to question my presence here and what it means for your jobs." She explained her background methodically. Her education, her teaching experience, her partnership with Judson in planning the territory's future development. Each fact was presented clearly, without embellishment or apology. "The railroad contract isn't just about Mr. Hawthorne's profits," she continued. "It's about jobs for your families, schools for your children, and connections to markets that will pay fair prices for territorial goods." Several workers nodded thoughtfully. They understood economic realities better than social prejudices. Their families' welfare depended on the ranch's continued success. Tom Rodriguez, the head foreman, stepped forward. His respect among the workers made his opinion influential. "Ma'am, what can we do to help? This ranch has been good to us. We don't abandon friends during hard times." The mood in the barn shifted perceptibly. Loyalty to fair employers outweighed social pressure from town authorities. These men had families to feed and futures to secure. Over the following days, Etta May implemented changes throughout the ranch operations. Her analytical mind identified inefficiencies that had cost them money for years. She reorganized supply schedules, improved record-keeping, and streamlined communication between different work crews. The results were immediate and impressive. Productivity increased while costs decreased. Workers appreciated the logical organization that made their jobs easier and more profitable for everyone involved. She began teaching evening classes in the bunkhouse, mathematics, reading, and basic business principles that would help the workers advance their own prospects. Knowledge was a gift she could share without depleting her own resources. Word of these improvements spread beyond the ranch boundaries. Some townspeople began questioning Dottie Campbell's characterization of Etta May as a destructive influence. Results spoke louder than rumors for those willing to listen. Meanwhile, the opposition organized systematically. Dottie held daily meetings in her parlor, coordinating strategies to isolate and pressure the Hawthorne household. She enlisted church leaders, business owners, and social organizations in her campaign. Anonymous letters began arriving at the ranch. The threats were vague but persistent, warning of consequences if the marriage continued. Something about the timing and coordination suggested organization rather than spontaneous community anger. Lem Tiny brought disturbing news from town. "People are being approached about selling their land," he reported during one of their evening discussions. "Offers are coming in well below market value, but buyers claim property values will collapse without the railroad deal." Etta May studied the pattern of land purchases Lem described. Her trained mind detected organization behind the apparently random offers. Someone was systematically targeting specific properties with strategic value. "Who's making these offers?" she asked. "Different names on the papers, but the money seems to come from the same source. Buyers are paying in cash, which is unusual for such large transactions." A plan began forming in Etta May's mind. Her analytical skills had solved complex problems before. This situation required the same methodical approach she'd used in Chicago when helping her community navigate legal and financial challenges. "We need to find out who's really behind these land purchases," she told Judson. "Something doesn't feel right about the timing." Etta May spent the next morning examining every threatening letter they'd received. She spread them across Judson's desk like pieces of a puzzle, her analytical mind searching for patterns others had missed. The paper quality was too consistent for random angry citizens. The ink came from expensive fountain pens, not the rough tools most ranch hands would use. "Look at the handwriting," she told Judson, pointing to specific words across different letters. "3 distinct styles, but they're trying to disguise it. Same person wrote multiple letters using different hands." Her teaching experience had trained her to recognize when students attempted to forge excuses or assignments. These threats showed similar deception techniques. Someone wanted them to believe the opposition was larger and more widespread than reality. Lem Tiny knocked softly before entering with a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. His weathered face carried the satisfaction of a successful mission. He'd spent 2 days in town, using his network of contacts to gather information about the mysterious land purchases. "Found something interesting at the county clerk's office," he said, pulling out a stack of property deeds. "All these sales have been recorded in the past month. Different buyer names, but look at the witness signatures." Etta May studied the documents with growing excitement. Her trained eye caught details that casual observers would miss. The witness signatures showed only 2 different handwritings across dozens of transactions. The same people were facilitating all these supposedly independent land purchases. "Mrs. Campbell signed as witness on half these deeds," she observed. "Her signature appears on properties scattered across 3 different townships. That's not coincidence." Judson examined the financial aspects of the transactions. The purchase amounts were consistently 20% below market value. Sellers were accepting these low offers despite the current railroad negotiations that should have increased property values. Someone's been spreading fear about the railroad deal falling through, he realized, convincing people to sell quickly before prices collapse completely. Etta May pulled out a territorial map and began marking the purchased properties with colored pins. A clear pattern emerged that made her breath catch in recognition. The acquired land formed a strategic corridor that would be essential for any railroad construction. "They're not just buying random parcels," she said, her voice tight with understanding. "They're acquiring the exact route the railroad would need to use. Someone with inside knowledge is positioning themselves to control the entire project." The three of them worked through the afternoon, cross-referencing property records with business correspondence found in Judson's files. The trail led back to meetings held before the dinner party, conversations about route planning and construction timelines. Lem revealed his most significant discovery. Overheard Dottie Campbell talking to those railroad executives yesterday. They weren't discussing how to replace the failed contract with you. They were planning how to restart negotiations once they controlled the necessary land. The conspiracy became clear with devastating precision. The social outrage about the marriage was manufactured theater designed to destroy Judson's credibility and force him out of the railroad partnership. Once his involvement ended, the conspirators could buy his land cheaply and control the entire railway development. They never cared about our marriage, Etta May said, anger building in her voice. We were just convenient targets. They needed a reason to turn the community against you. Judson studied the financial projections in his ledgers. If the conspirators succeeded in controlling the railroad route, they would make hundreds of thousands in profits while the community paid inflated prices for transportation services. The territorial economy would be held hostage by a small group of manipulators. We need proof they can't deny, Etta May said, her strategic mind already working on their counterattack. Public documentation that shows their coordination and planning. Her analytical skills had helped Chicago families navigate complex legal battles against predatory landlords and corrupt officials. This situation required similar techniques, but on a larger scale with higher stakes. That evening, they developed their investigation strategy. Lem would continue gathering information from his contacts throughout the territory. His reputation as a reliable ranch hand gave him access to conversations others couldn't hear. Etta May would analyze financial records and legal documents, looking for patterns that proved coordination between the conspirators. Her mathematical training enabled her to track money flows and identify connections others would miss. Judson would maintain public appearances, while secretly documenting conversations with former business partners. Some of his associates might be willing to provide evidence if they understood the full scope of the conspiracy. The next day brought a breakthrough. Tom Rodriguez approached Etta May during her evening teaching session in the bunkhouse. His expression carried both anger and determination as he pulled a crumpled letter from his pocket. "Someone offered to buy my family's small plot yesterday," he said. "Same lowball tactics you've been tracking. But I recognize the man making the offer. He works for Dottie Campbell's business interests." The letter contained the same formatting and language patterns Etta May had identified in previous purchases. More importantly, it referenced specific timeline information that hadn't been made public. The conspirators were operating with inside knowledge of railroad construction schedules. They're getting desperate, she realized, moving too fast and making mistakes. They need to complete their land acquisitions before someone discovers their plan. Over the following days, more evidence accumulated. Ranch workers reported suspicious visitors asking questions about property values and railroad routes. Townspeople mentioned pressure to sell their land before the inevitable economic collapse following the failed dinner party. Etta May compiled everything into a comprehensive presentation that would expose the conspiracy's scope and methods. Her teaching background helped her organize complex information into clear, understandable arguments that community members could follow easily. "We have enough evidence to destroy their credibility," she told Judson. "The question is how to present it most effectively." The weekly town meeting was scheduled for Saturday. Normally, it would focus on routine municipal business and social announcements. This week, it would determine the territory's future and either vindicate their marriage or destroy their lives completely. Saturday morning arrived with unusual tension crackling through Silver Creek territory. The town hall filled beyond capacity as families gathered for what everyone expected to be a decisive confrontation. Dottie Campbell had spent the week promising a final resolution to the social scandal threatening their community's values. Etta May entered the hall beside Judson, her head held high despite the hostile stares surrounding them. She carried a leather portfolio containing weeks of careful investigation. Her teaching experience had prepared her for skeptical audiences, but never with stakes this personal and devastating. Dottie commanded center stage from the front row, her elaborate hat adorned with feathers that bobbed as she whispered instructions to her supporters. Mrs. Campbell sat rigidly beside her sister, still smarting from the public humiliation at the dinner party. The railroad executives occupied reserved seats near the podium, their expensive suits and confident expressions suggesting they expected favorable outcomes. They'd invested too much planning in this conspiracy to accept defeat now. Mayor Henderson called the meeting to order with unusual formality. His nervous glances toward Dottie revealed who truly controlled the proceedings. The territorial government existed at the pleasure of influential families who funded local operations. "We're here to address the crisis threatening our community's moral foundation," the mayor began. "Recent events have called into question the leadership we've trusted to guide our economic future." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the packed hall. Families nodded approvingly while shooting disapproving looks toward the Hawthorne couple. Public opinion had been carefully cultivated through weeks of strategic gossip and social pressure. Dottie rose gracefully, her dramatic flair commanding immediate attention. She'd rehearsed this moment extensively, preparing arguments designed to force Judson into choosing between his marriage and his business obligations. "Friends and neighbors," she declared, her voice carrying easily through the silent hall. "We face a simple choice between progress and chaos. The railroad contract that promises prosperity for our children hangs in the balance." She gestured toward the railroad executives, who nodded gravely at appropriate moments. Their performance suggested reluctant businessmen forced to make difficult decisions by circumstances beyond their control. "These gentlemen represent our connection to the modern world. They offer jobs, growth, and opportunity. But they require partners who understand proper social boundaries and community values." The crowd's attention focused completely on Dottie's presentation. She'd mastered the art of public persuasion through years of social leadership. Her arguments appealed directly to their economic fears and cultural prejudices. "Mr. Hawthorne must choose," she continued, building toward her dramatic climax. "His inappropriate marriage or his responsibility to this territory's future. He cannot serve both masters." Applause erupted from her supporters, while neutral families exchanged worried glances. The economic arguments were compelling regardless of personal feelings about social justice. Their children's futures depended on the railroad connection. Mayor Henderson turned toward Judson with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Hawthorne, the community requires your response to these concerns. Will you dissolve this marriage to preserve our economic partnership?" Judson stood slowly, his hand briefly touching Etta May's shoulder for support. The moment of truth had arrived sooner than expected. Their careful plan required adjustment to meet this direct challenge. "Before I respond," he said, his voice steady despite the pressure, "I believe the community deserves complete information about the forces shaping these decisions." He nodded toward Etta May, who rose with quiet confidence. Her portfolio contained evidence that would transform this confrontation from personal attack into community awakening. "Mrs. Hawthorne has information vital to understanding our current situation," Judson announced, using her married name deliberately. "I ask that you listen to what she's discovered." Angry voices erupted from Dottie's supporters. The idea of hearing testimony from the woman they'd come to condemn violated their expectations completely. This meeting was supposed to result in her public humiliation and removal. "She has no right to speak here," shouted one of Dottie's allies. "This is a meeting for respectable community members." Mayor Henderson raised his hand for silence, though his expression showed deep discomfort with the developing situation. Protocol demanded fairness, even when personal preferences suggested otherwise. Etta May approached the podium with the same dignity she'd maintained throughout weeks of persecution. Her teaching background had trained her to present complex information clearly and persuasively. This audience would be her greatest challenge. "Over the past month, someone has been systematically purchasing land throughout this territory," she began, opening her portfolio to reveal detailed maps and financial records. "These purchases form a specific pattern that controls the exact route any railroad would need to use." She displayed the territorial map with colored pins marking each acquired property. The strategic corridor became obvious even to casual observers. Someone with inside knowledge had positioned themselves to control the entire railroad development. The buyers used different names, But the same people witnessed every transaction, she continued, showing the property deeds with highlighted signatures. Mrs. Campbell's signature appears on dozens of sales across 3 townships. Shocked murmurs spread through the crowd as families recognized the implications. Mrs. Campbell's face drained of color while Dottie shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The conspiracy was being exposed with mathematical precision. The purchase prices were consistently 20% below market value, Edame explained, displaying financial calculations. Sellers were convinced to accept these offers by rumors that the railroad deal would collapse, destroying property values. The railroad executives exchanged nervous glances as their role in the conspiracy became clear. Their confident expressions had transformed into barely concealed panic as community members began understanding the manipulation they'd endured. The social outrage about our marriage was manufactured to destroy Mr. Hawthorne's credibility, Edame concluded, her voice carrying across the silent hall. Once he was removed from the railroad partnership, these conspirators planned to control the entire project and charge inflated prices for transportation services. Tom Rodriguez stood from his seat, waving the suspicious letter he'd received. She's right. They tried to buy my family's land yesterday using the same tactics, same lies about economic collapse. Other voices joined his as community members realized they'd been targeted by the same deceptive scheme. The conspiracy's scope became undeniable as testimony poured in from across the territory. Dottie Campbell rose in desperate defense, her carefully constructed authority crumbling under the weight of documented evidence. These are lies designed to deflect attention from moral corruption. But her protests fell on increasingly skeptical ears. The community understood they'd been manipulated by people they'd trusted with their economic future. Their anger shifted from the Hawthorne marriage toward the conspirators who'd threatened their prosperity.